Laws, Chapter 3. The roles of guardians in the state.
Enough of this. So, what can we consider as the origin of government? Can we best understand it by observing the progress of states and their transitions to good or evil?
What do you mean?
I mean that we can observe them over time and see the changes that occur throughout countless ages.
How so?
Well, do you think we can calculate the time that has passed since cities first existed and people became citizens of them?
Hardly.
But we can be certain that it must be vast and incalculable.
Certainly.
And haven't thousands and thousands of cities come into existence during this time, and just as many have perished? And hasn't each of them experienced every form of government multiple times, growing larger or smaller, and improving or declining?
Yes, that is true.
Let us try to determine the cause of these changes, as that will explain the initial origin and development of forms of government.
Very well. You should try to explain your thoughts to us, and we will try to understand you.
Do you believe that there is any truth in ancient traditions?
What traditions?
The traditions about the many destructions of mankind caused by floods, plagues, and other means, and the survival of a remnant?
Everyone is inclined to believe them.
Let us consider one of them, the famous flood.
What should we observe about it?
I mean to say that those who survived would only be hill shepherds, a small remnant of humans preserved on the mountaintops.
Clearly.
These survivors would naturally be unfamiliar with the arts and various devices that are known to city dwellers due to self-interest or ambition, and with all the wrongs they inflict upon each other.
That is true.
Let us suppose, then, that the cities in the plains and on the coast were destroyed at that time.
Very well.
Wouldn't all tools and every other excellent invention of political or any other kind of wisdom have perished as well?
Yes, my friend. And if things had always remained as they are now, how could any discovery have ever been made, even in the smallest detail? The arts were unknown for countless thousands of years. And it has only been 1,000 or 2,000 years since the discoveries of Daedalus, Orpheus, and Palamedes, since Marsyas and Olympus invented music, and Amphion invented the lyre, not to mention countless other recent inventions.
Have you forgotten, Cleinias, the name of a friend who is quite recent?
I suppose you mean Epimenides.
Yes, my friend. He indeed surpasses all of mankind with his invention, as you say, for he put into practice what Hesiod, works in days, only preached in the past.
Yes, according to our tradition.
After the great destruction, can we not suppose that the state of man was something like this? In the beginning, there was a vast, desolate wilderness and a vast expanse of land. A few herds of oxen would be the only survivors of the animal world, and there might be a few goats, but not enough to sustain the shepherds who tended them.
True.
And do you think that they could have any recollection of cities, governments, or laws, which we are now discussing?
None at all.
And from this situation, has everything that we now have and has emerged, cities, governments, arts, laws, and a great deal of vice and virtue.
What do you mean?
Well, my friend, how can we suppose that those who knew nothing of the good and evil of cities could have developed fully in terms of virtue or vice?
I understand what you mean, and you are right.
But as time passed and the population grew, the world became what it is now.
That is true.
Of course, this change did not happen all at once, but gradually, over an exceptionally long period of time.
That is a highly probable assumption.
Initially, they would have been naturally afraid to descend from the heights into the plains.
Of course.
The small number of survivors at that time would have made them even more eager to see each other. However, the means of travel by land or sea had entirely been lost, along with the arts, and it was exceedingly difficult to reach one another. Iron, brass, and all metals were mixed and had disappeared in the chaos, making it impossible to extract ore from them. They also had very few means of cutting down trees. Even if we assumed that some tools might have been preserved in the mountains, they would have quickly worn out and disappeared, and there would be no more until the art of metallurgy was revived.
That would not have been possible.
How many generations would it take for this to happen?
Clearly, many generations.
During this period, and for some time afterwards, all the arts that require iron, brass, and similar materials would have disappeared.
Certainly.
Faction and war would have also ceased to exist in those days, for many reasons.
How would that be?
Firstly, the desolation of these primitive men would create in them a feeling of affection and goodwill towards one another. Secondly, they would have no reason to quarrel about their food, as they would have an abundance of pasture, except in some specific cases and at the beginning. They would obtain most of their food from their pasture land, having plenty of milk and meat. Additionally, they would hunt for other food, which would be valuable in both quantity and quality. They would also have an abundance of clothing, bedding, dwellings, and utensils that could be used on the fire or not. The arts of pottery and weaving do not require the use of iron. God has given these two arts to man to provide him with all the necessary things, so that even in the most desperate situations, humans can still grow and thrive. Therefore, in those days, mankind was not extremely poor, and poverty was not a cause of conflict among them. They could not be rich either, as they had no gold or silver. This was their condition at that time. The community that has neither poverty nor riches will always have the noblest principles. There is no arrogance or injustice in such a community, nor are there any disputes or envy. Therefore, they were good, and because they were what we call simple-minded. When they were told about good and evil, they believed it to be true and practiced it. No one had the wit to suspect another of lying, as people do now. They believed what they heard about gods and men to be true and lived accordingly. That is why they were as we have described them.
That aligns with my views and those of my friend here.
If many generations continued to live in a simple manner, although they might be more primitive and ignorant of the arts, including land and naval warfare, legal practices, and conflicts, would they not be simpler, more courageous, more temperate, and more just? The reason for this has already been explained.
Very true.
I want you to understand that what has been said and what will be said is intended to explain why the men of that time needed laws and who their lawgiver was.
So far, what you have said has been well said.
They did not need lawgivers yet. Such a thing was unlikely to exist in their time, as they did not have writing. They lived according to habit and the customs of their ancestors.
Probably.
However, there was already a form of government that is referred to as lordship. This form of government still exists in many places, among both Greeks and barbarians. Homer describes this form of government as prevailing among the Cyclopes. They have neither councils nor judgments, but they dwell in hollow caves on the tops of high mountains, and everyone gives law to his wife and children, and they do not busy themselves about one another.
That is a charming poet of yours. I have read some other verses of his, which are very clever. But I do not know much about him, as foreign poets are not widely read among the Cretans.
But they are in Lacedaemon, and he appears to be the greatest of them all. However, the way of life he describes is not Spartan, but rather Ionian. He confirms what you were saying when he traces the ancient state of mankind back to barbarism through tradition.
Yes, he does confirm it, and we can accept his testimony that such forms of government sometimes arise.
We can.
Were not these states made up of men who had been dispersed into individual dwellings and families due to the poverty caused by devastation? Did not the eldest rule among them, as government originated from the authority of a father and mother? They followed them like a flock of birds, forming one group under the patriarchal rule and sovereignty of their parents, which is the most just form of sovereignty.
Very true.
Afterward, they came together in larger numbers and expanded their cities. They turned to agriculture, starting at the foot of the mountains. They built walls and defenses to protect themselves from wild animals, creating a single large and common habitation.
Yes, we can assume that.
There is another thing that would happen.
What?
When these larger habitations grew out of the smaller ones, each smaller one would survive within the larger one. Every family would be under the rule of the eldest and, due to their separation, would have their own customs in matters divine and human, which they would have inherited from their parents. These customs would incline them towards order and courage if their parents possessed those qualities. They would naturally pass on their own preferences to their children and their children's children. As we are saying, these customs would find their way into the larger society, already having their own specific laws.
Certainly.
And every man surely likes his own laws best, and the laws of others not so well.
True.
Then now we seem to have stumbled upon the beginnings of legislation.
Exactly.
The next step will be that these people who have gathered together will choose some arbitrators, who will review the laws of all of them, and will publicly present those that they approve to the leaders who lead the tribes, and who are in a way their kings, allowing them to choose the ones they think are best. These people will themselves be called legislators, and will appoint officials, creating some sort of aristocracy or monarchy out of the dynasties or lordships, and they will live in this altered state of government.
Yes, that would be the natural order of things.
Now, let us discuss a third form of government, in which all other forms and conditions of politics and cities come together.
What is that?
The form which Homer indicates as following the second. This third form arose when, as he says, Dardanus founded Dardania, for not as yet had the holy Ilium been built on the plain to be a city of speaking men, but they were still dwelling at the foot of many-fountained Ida. For indeed, in these verses, and in what he said about the Cyclopes, he speaks the words of God and nature, for poets are a divine race, and often in their songs, with the help of the muses and the graces, they attain truth.
Yes.
Now, let us continue with the rest of our story, which will illustrate our proposed design. Shall we do so?
By all means.
Ilium was built, when they descended from the mountain, in a large and beautiful plain, on a sort of low hill, watered by many rivers descending from Ida.
That is the tradition.
And we must assume that this event took place many ages after the flood. A remarkable forgetfulness of the previous destruction seems to have come over them when they placed their town right under numerous streams flowing from the heights, trusting for their security to not extremely high hills either.
There must have been a long interval, clearly.
And, as the population increased, many other cities would begin to be inhabited.
Undoubtedly.
Those cities made war against Troy, both by sea and land, for at that time men were no longer afraid of the sea.
Clearly.
The Achaeans remained 10 years and overthrew Troy.
True.
And during the 10 years in which the Achaeans were besieging Ilium, the homes of the besiegers were falling into a bad state. Their youth revolted, and when the soldiers returned to their own cities and families, they did not receive them properly, and as they should have, numerous deaths, murders, and exiles were the consequence. The exiles returned, under a new name, no longer Achaeans, but Dorians, a name which they derived from Dorius, for it was he who gathered them together. The rest of the story is told by you Lacedaemonians as part of the history of Sparta.
Indeed.
Thus, after deviating from the original subject of laws into music and drinking parties, the argument has, providentially, come back to the same point and presents us with another opportunity. For we have reached the settlement of Lacedaemon, which, as you rightly say, is in laws and institutions the sister of Crete. And we are all the better for the digression because we have gone through various governments and settlements and have witnessed the foundation of a first, second, and third state, succeeding one another in infinite time. And now, there appears on the horizon a fourth state or nation which was once in the process of settlement and has continued settled to this day. If, from all this, we are able to discern what is well or poorly settled, and what laws are the salvation and what are the destruction of cities, and what changes would make a state happy, O Megillus and Cleinias, we may now begin again, unless we have some fault to find with the previous discussion.
If some God would promise us that our new inquiry about legislation would be as good and comprehensive as the present, I would go a great way to hear such another, and would think that a day as long as this, and we are now approaching the longest day of the year, was too short for the discussion.
Then I suppose that we must consider this subject?
Certainly.
Let us imagine ourselves now when Lacedaemon and Argos and Messene and the rest of the Peloponnesus were all completely subjugated, Megillus, to your ancestors, for afterwards, as the legend tells us, they divided their army into 3 portions and settled 3 cities, Argos, Messene, and Lacedaemon.
True.
Timanus was the king of Argos, Cresphontes of Messene, and Procles and Eurysthenes of Lacedaemon.
Certainly.
To these kings, all the men of that time swore an oath that they would assist them if anyone subverted their kingdom.
True.
But can a kingship be destroyed, or was any other form of government ever destroyed, by anyone other than the rulers themselves? No, indeed, by Zeus. Have we already forgotten what was said a little while ago?
No.
And may we not now further confirm what was then mentioned? For we have come upon facts which have brought us back again to the same principle, so that, in resuming the discussion, we shall not be inquiring about an empty theory, but about events that happened. The case was as follows: 3 royal heroes swore an oath to 3 cities that were under a kingly government, and the cities to the kings, that both rulers and subjects should govern and be governed according to the laws that were common to all of them. The rulers promised that as time went on, they would not make their rule more arbitrary, and the subjects said that if the rulers observed these conditions, they would never overthrow or allow others to overthrow those kingdoms. The kings were to assist kings and peoples when injured, and the peoples were to assist peoples and kings in the same manner. Is this not true?
Yes.
And the 3 states to whom these laws were given, whether their kings or any others were the authors of them, had the greatest assurance of maintaining their constitutions?
What assurance?
That the other 2 states were always obligated to come to the aid of a rebellious third.
True.
Many people argue that legislators should impose laws that most of the people will readily accept. But this is like commanding gymnastic trainers or doctors to treat their students or patients in a pleasing manner.
Exactly.
Whereas the doctor may often be content if he can restore health and make the body whole without causing too much pain.
Certainly.
The men of that time also had another advantage that made the task of passing laws much easier.
What advantage?
The legislators of that time, when they equalized property, avoided the great accusation that usually arises in legislation when someone tries to disturb land ownership or abolish debts. They saw that without this reform, true equality could never be achieved. When a legislator tries to make such changes, everyone opposes him, claiming that he is disrupting vested interests and accusing him of introducing agrarian laws and debt cancellation. This can be quite overwhelming. But the Dorians could not be criticized for distributing land, as there was nothing to stop them. And as for debts, they did not have any significant or long-standing ones.
Very true.
But then, my good friends, why did the settlement and legislation of their country turn out so poorly?
What do you mean? And why do you blame them?
There were 3 kingdoms, and 2 of them quickly corrupted their original constitution and laws, leaving only Sparta as the remaining one.
The question you ask is not easily answered.
And yet it must be answered when we are investigating laws, as this is our old man serious game that we play to pass the time, as I mentioned when we first started our journey.
Certainly, and we must find out why this happened.
What laws are more deserving of our attention than those that have governed such cities? Or what state settlements are greater or more renowned?
I know of none.
Can we doubt that your ancestors intended these institutions not only to protect Peloponnesus, but all of Greece, in case they were attacked by barbarians? When the people around Troy provoked the Trojan War with their insolence, they relied on the power of the Assyrians and the empire of Ninus, which still existed and held great prestige. The people of that time feared the united Assyrian Empire just as we now fear the great king. And the second capture of Troy was a serious offense to them because Troy was part of the Assyrian Empire. To counter this danger, the single army was divided between 3 cities by the royal brothers, sons of Heracles. It seemed like a fair plan and a much better arrangement than the expedition against Troy. Firstly, the people of that time believed that the Heraclidae were better leaders than the Pelopidi. Secondly, they believed that their army was more courageous than the one that went against Troy. Although the latter defeated the Trojans, they themselves were defeated by the Heraclidae, Achaeans by Dorians. Can we not suppose that this was the intention with which the people of that time established the constitutions of their states?
Quite true.
And would not men who had shared many dangers, were governed by a single lineage of royal brothers, and had sought the advice of oracles, particularly the Delphian Apollo, think that such states would be firmly and lastingly established?
Of course they would.
Yet these institutions, which held such great expectations, seem to have rapidly disappeared, except for the small part that still exists in your land. And to this day, this third part has never stopped warring against the other two, whereas if the original idea had been carried out and they had agreed to be united, their power would have been invincible in war.
No doubt.
But what caused the downfall of this glorious confederacy? This is a subject worth considering.
Certainly, one will not find more striking examples of laws or governments being the salvation or destruction of great and noble interests than what is presented here.
Now we have arrived at a real and important question.
Very true.
Have you never noticed, wise friend, that all men, including ourselves at this moment, often imagine that they see something beautiful that could have achieved wonders if someone had known how to make proper use of it? Yet this way of looking at things may turn out to be a mistake, not in accordance with nature, neither in our case nor in any other.
What are you referring to? What do you mean?
I was thinking about my own admiration for the Heraclid expedition, which was noble and could have had remarkable results for the Greeks if used correctly. I was just laughing at myself.
But were you not right and wise in what you said, and were we not right in agreeing with you?
But I cannot help but observe that when anyone sees something great or powerful, they immediately have the feeling that if the owner only knew how to use their great and noble possession, they would be happy and achieve great results.
And would they not be justified in thinking so?
Consider this. In what way does this kind of praise seem just? First, in relation to the matter at hand, if the commanders at that time had known how to meticulously organize their army, how would they have achieved success? Would it not have been by binding them all together and preserving them forever, giving them freedom and dominion at will, with the power to do whatever they and their descendants desired in the whole world, both Greek and barbarian? What other purpose could they have had?
Very good.
Suppose someone were to express admiration for great wealth or family honor, or something similar, they would praise them under the belief that through them they would attain what they desire.
They would.
Well, doesn't this argument show that there is one common desire among all mankind?
What is it?
The desire that a man has for all things, if possible, or at least human things, to happen according to his soul's desire.
Certainly.
And having this desire always, at every stage of life, in youth, in adulthood, in old age, he cannot help but always pray for its fulfillment.
No doubt.
And we join in the prayers of our friends and ask for them what they ask for themselves.
We do.
A son is dear to the father, and the younger to the elder.
Of course.
And yet the son often prays for things that the father prays he may not obtain.
When the son is young and foolish, you mean?
Yes, or when the father, in old age or the heart of youth, without a sense of right and justice, prays fervently, influenced by feelings like Theseus when he cursed the unfortunate Hippolytus. Do you think the son, with a sense of right and justice, will join in his father's prayers?
I understand you to mean that a man should not desire or be in a hurry to have all things according to his wish, for his wish may conflict with his reason. But every state and every individual ought to pray and strive for wisdom.
Yes, and I remember, as you will too, what I said at first, that a statesman and legislator should establish laws with a view to wisdom, while you argued that a good lawgiver should order everything with a view to war. And I replied that there are 4 virtues, but according to your view, only one of them is the aim of legislation. However, you should consider all virtues, especially the first and foremost one, which is wisdom, intellect, and opinion, accompanied by affection and desire. And now the argument returns to the same point, and I say once again, jokingly, or seriously, that the prayer of a fool is full of danger, as it is likely to result in the opposite of what he desires. And if you prefer to take my word seriously, I am willing for you to do so. And I suspect that you will find, as I have already said, that it was not cowardice that caused the downfall of the Dorian kings and their entire plan, nor was it ignorance of military matters on the part of the rulers or their subjects. Their misfortunes were due to their general decline, especially their ignorance of the most important human affairs. That was true then, and it is still true, and will always be the case. I will try my best to explain and demonstrate this to you, my friends, throughout the course of this argument.
Please continue, stranger. Compliments are bothersome, but we will show, not just in words but in actions, how much we value your words, as we will pay close attention to them. That is how a free man best shows his approval or disapproval.
Excellent, Cleinias. Let us do as you say.
By all means, if it is the will of heaven. Go on.
Well, continuing with the same line of thought, I say that the greatest ignorance was the downfall of the Dorian power, and that now, as then, ignorance is ruinous. And if this is true, the legislator must strive to instill wisdom in states and eradicate ignorance to the best of their ability.
That is evident.
Now consider what truly constitutes the greatest ignorance. I would like to know if you and McGillis would agree with what I am about to say. The greatest ignorance is when a person hates something that they still believe to be good and noble and loves, and embraces something that they know to be unjust and evil. This conflict between the sense of pleasure and the judgment of reason in the soul is the worst ignorance, and the greatest, as it affects the majority of the human soul. The principle that experiences pleasure and pain in an individual is like the masses or populace in a state. And when the soul opposes knowledge, opinion, or reason, which are its natural rulers, I call that folly, just as in a state when the multitude refuses to obey their rulers and the laws. Similarly, in an individual, when sound reasoning resides in the soul but does not good, and the opposite of good. I consider all these cases to be the worst ignorance, whether in individuals or in states. You should understand that I am referring to something quite different from the ignorance of craftsmen.
Yes, my friend, we understand and agree.
Then let us declare and affirm, first and foremost, that a citizen who does not understand these things should never be entrusted with any kind of authority. They must be labeled as ignorant, even if they are skilled in calculation and proficient in various accomplishments and mental agility. On the other hand, those who possess wisdom, even if they, in the words of the proverb, do not know how to read or swim, should be considered wise, and authority should be entrusted to them, just as it would be to sensible individuals. For my friends, how can there be any wisdom when there is no harmony? There is none. But the greatest wisdom can be said to be the noblest and greatest harmony. And the one who lives according to reason is a partaker of this wisdom, while the one devoid of reason destroys their household and is the opposite of a savior of the state. They are completely ignorant of political wisdom. Let us establish this, as I was saying.
Let it be established.
I suppose that there must be rulers and subjects in states?
Certainly.
And what are the principles on which men rule and obey in cities, whether large or small, and similarly in families? What are they, and how many are there? Does there not one just claims of authority than of fathers and mothers and, in general, progenitors to rule over their offspring?
There is.
Next follows the principle that the noble should rule over the ignoble, and thirdly, that the elder should rule and the younger obey?
Of course.
And fourthly, that slaves should be ruled, and their masters rule?
Of course.
Fifthly, if I am not mistaken, comes the principle that the stronger shall rule and the weaker be ruled?
That is a rule that must not be disobeyed.
Yes, and a rule that prevails widely among all creatures and is according to nature, as the Theban poet Pindar once said. And the sixth principle, and the greatest of all, is that the wise should lead and command, and the ignorant follow and obey. And yet, O wise Pindar, as I would reply to him, this is surely not contrary to nature, but according to nature. It is the rule of law over willing subjects, not a rule of compulsion.
Most true.
There is a seventh kind of rule that is awarded by lot and is dear to the gods and a sign of good fortune. The one on whom the lot falls is a ruler, and the one who fails to obtain the lot becomes a subject. And we affirm that this is quite just.
Certainly.
Then now, as we say playfully to any of those who lightly undertake the making of laws, you see, legislator, the principles of government, how many there are, and that they are naturally opposed to each other. There we have discovered a fountainhead of seditions, to which you must attend. And first, we will ask you to consider with us how and in what respect the kings of Argos and Messene violated these maxims of ours and ruined themselves and the great and famous Hellenic power of the olden times. Was it because they did not know how wisely Hesiod spoke when he said that the half is often more than the whole? His meaning was that when taking the whole would be dangerous, and taking the half would be the safe and moderate course, then the moderate or better was more than the immoderate or worse.
Very true.
And may we suppose that this immoderate spirit is more fatal when found among kings than when among peoples?
It is likely that ignorance will be a disorder especially prevalent among kings because they lead a proud and luxurious life.
Is it not clear that the chief aim of the kings of that time was to get the better of the established laws, and that they were not in harmony with the principles which they had agreed to observe by word and oath? This lack of harmony may have appeared as wisdom, but it was, as we assert, the greatest ignorance. It completely overthrew the entire empire through dissonance and harsh discord.
Very likely.
Good. And what measures should the legislator have taken to prevent this calamity? Truly, there is no great wisdom in knowing, and no great difficulty in telling, after the evil has happened. But to have foreseen the remedy at the time would have required a much wiser head than ours.
What do you mean?
Anyone who looks at what has occurred with you Lacedaemonians, Megillus, can easily know and say what should have been done at that time.
Please speak more clearly.
Nothing can be clearer than the observation I am about to make.
What is it?
That if anyone gives too much power to anything, too large a sail to a vessel, too much food to the body, too much authority to the mind, and does not observe the mean, everything is overthrown. In the wantonness of excess, it runs to disorders in one case and to injustice, which is the child of excess, in the other. I mean to say, my dear friends, that there is no young and irresponsible soul of man who will be able to resist the temptation of arbitrary power. Under such circumstances, they will all become filled with folly, the worst of diseases, and be hated by their closest friends and family. When this happens, their kingdom is undermined, and all their power vanishes. Great legislators who know the meaning should be aware of this danger. From what we can guess at this distance of time, what happened was as follows.
What?
A god, who watched over Sparta and saw into the future, gave you 2 families of kings instead of 1. This brought you more within the limits of moderation. In addition, some human wisdom mixed with divine power observed that the constitution of your government was still feverish and excited. It tempered your inborn strength and pride of birth with the moderation that comes with age. It made the power of your 28 elders equal to that of the kings in the most important matters. But your third savior, recognizing that your government was still growing and becoming unruly, and wanting to control it, established the ephors, whose power he made to resemble that of magistrates elected by chance. Through this arrangement, the kingly office, which was a combination of the right elements and properly moderated, was preserved, and in turn, preserved everything else. If there had only been the original legislators, Timanus, Cresphontes, and their contemporaries, they would not have been able to preserve even a portion of Aristodemus. They lacked proper experience in legislation, otherwise they would not have believed that oaths could moderate a youthful spirit invested with a power that could easily become a tyranny. Now that God has taught us what kind of government would have been or will be lasting, there is no wisdom, as I have already said, in judging after the fact. There is no difficulty in learning from an example that has already occurred. But if someone could have foreseen all of this at the time and been able to moderate the government of the 3 kingdoms and unite them into one, they could have saved all the excellent institutions that were conceived at that time. No Persian or any other army would have dared to attack us or would have considered Greece as a power to be despised.
True.
There was little credit to us, Cleinias, in defeating them. The discredit was not that the conquerors did not achieve glorious victories on land and sea, but rather that only one of the 3 cities fought on behalf of Greece, while the other 2 were so useless that one was waging a mighty war against Sparta, preventing them from aiding. The city of Argos, which had the highest status at the time, refused to answer the call for help or provide aid. Many dishonorable things could be said about Greece in connection with that war. In fact, we cannot honestly say that Greece repelled the invader. The truth is, if the Athenians and Spartans had not acted together to ward off the impending threat, all the tribes of Greece would have been mixed in chaos, with Greeks mingling with each other, barbarians mingling with Greeks, and Greeks with barbarians. Just like the nations that are now under Persian rule, due to unnatural divisions and alliances, they are scattered and live miserably. These, Cleinias and Megillus, are the criticisms we must make against past and present statesmen and legislators if we want to analyze the causes of their failure and figure out what else could have been done. We said earlier that there should not be great and absolute powers. This was based on the idea that a state should be free, wise, and harmonious, and that a legislator should legislate with this goal in mind. It should not surprise us that we constantly propose different aims for the legislator. When we say that temperance should be the aim, or wisdom should be the aim, or friendship should be the aim, all these aims are the same. Therefore, a variety of the ways we express them should not disturb us.
Let us continue the argument with that understanding. Now, speaking of friendship, wisdom, and freedom, I would like you to tell me what, in your opinion, the legislator should aim for.
Listen to me then. There are two main forms of government from which all others can be said to be derived. One can be called monarchy and the other democracy. The Persians have the highest form of the former, and we have the highest form of the latter. All the other forms of government are variations of these two. If you want to have both liberty and the combination of friendship and wisdom, you must have both forms of government. The argument emphatically declares that no city can be well governed if it is not composed of both.
That seems impossible.
Neither form, if it is exclusively and excessively attached to either monarchy or freedom, is moderate. However, your states, Sparta and Crete, have more moderation. The same was true for the Athenians and Persians in ancient times, but now they have less. Shall I tell you why?
Please do if it will help clarify our subject.
Listen then. There was a time when the Persians had more of the state, that is, a balance between slavery and freedom. During the reign of Cyrus, they were both free and rulers of many others. The rulers granted their subjects a share of freedom, and because they were treated as equals, the soldiers had a better relationship with their generals and were more willing to act in times of danger. If there was a wise man among them who could give good advice, he shared his wisdom with the public. The king was not jealous and allowed him full freedom of speech. He honored those who could advise him in any matter. The nation prospered in all respects because there was freedom, friendship, and a sharing of ideas among them.
That certainly seems to have been the case.
So, how was this advantage lost under Cambyses and then regained under Darius? Shall I try to guess?
The inquiry undoubtedly has relevance to our subject.
I believe that Cyrus, although a great and patriotic general, never prioritized education or the organization of his household.
What makes you say that?
I think that from a young age, he focused on being a soldier and entrusted the education of his children to women. They raised them as privileged individuals, already blessed and in no need of further blessings. They believed that they were happy enough and that no one should oppose them in any way. They forced everyone to praise everything they said or did. That is how they raised them.
Quite an impressive education, indeed.
It was the kind of education that women were likely to provide, especially princesses who had recently become wealthy. And with the absence of men, who were occupied with wars and dangers and had no time to look after them, the children were raised in the Median fashion by women and eunuchs. This led to them becoming unrestrained, as they were never corrected. So, after Cyrus' death, his sons, in their excessive luxury and freedom, took the kingdom. One brother killed the other because he could not tolerate a rival, and then the killer himself, driven mad by wine and brutality, lost his kingdom to the Medes and the eunuch, as they called him, who despised Cambyses' foolishness.
That's how the story goes, and it is likely the truth.
Yes, according to tradition, the empire returned to the Persians through Darius and the 7 chiefs.
True.
Let us continue with the rest of the story. Darius was not the son of a king and did not receive a luxurious education. When he ascended the throne as one of the 7, he divided the country into 7 portions. Some traces of this arrangement remain. He created laws based on the principle of introducing universal equality in the state and included in his laws the settlement of the tribute that Cyrus promised. This created a sense of friendship and community among all the Persians and endeared the people to him through money and gifts. As a result, his armies willingly acquired countries as large as those left by Cyrus. Darius was succeeded by his son Xerxes, who was also raised in a royal and luxurious manner. Could we not justly say, "O Darius, how did you make the same mistake as Cyrus in raising Xerxes, and not see the disastrous outcome?" Xerxes, being a product of the same education, experienced a fate like Cambyses. From that time until now, there has never been a genuinely great king among the Persians, despite them all being called great. Their decline cannot be attributed to chance, as I believe. The reason lies in the corrupt lives led by the sons of the very wealthy and royal. No boy or man, young or old, will excel in virtue if they have been raised in such a manner. This is what the legislator must consider, and what we must consider at this moment. The Lacedaemonians deserve praise for not giving special honor or education to wealth over poverty, or to a royal position over a private one, unless the divine and inspired lawgiver originally commanded it. No one should receive preeminent honor in a state simply because they surpass others in wealth, just as no one should receive it for being swift, beautiful, or strong, unless they possess some virtue, particularly the virtue of temperance.
What do you mean, stranger?
I suppose courage is a part of virtue?
Of course.
Then, hear me out and judge for yourself. Would you want to have a very courageous man as a roommate or neighbor who had no self-control?
Heaven forbids.
Or an artist who was skilled in their craft, but a rogue?
Certainly not.
And surely justice cannot exist without temperance.
Impossible.
Just as our ideal wise man, who experiences pleasure and pain in accordance with true reason, cannot be intemperate.
No.
There is another consideration regarding the fair and unfair distribution of honors in states.
What is it?
I would like to know if temperance, without the other virtues, existing alone in a person's soul, should be praised or blamed.
I cannot say.
That is the best answer. Whichever alternative you chose, I believe you would have been wrong.
I am fortunate.
Very well. A quality that is merely an accessory to things that can be praised or blamed does not deserve an expression of opinion and is best left unmentioned.
Are you referring to temperance?
Yes. But of the other virtues, the one that is most beneficial when accompanied by this accessory deserves the most honor. The next in line is the one that is beneficial to the next degree, and so on. Each virtue should be honored in the proper order.
That's true.
And shouldn't the legislator determine these classes?
Certainly he should.
Let us leave the arrangement of details to him. But we, as lovers of law, can determine the general division of laws into a first, second, and third class, according to their importance.
Very good.
We argue, then, that a state that wants to be safe and happy, to the extent that human nature allows, must and should distribute honor and dishonor in the right way. And the right way is to prioritize the goods of the soul, assuming temperance is present, and to assign second place to the goods of the body, and third place to money and property. And if any legislator or state deviates from this rule by giving money the place of honor or by prioritizing what is last, can't we say that they are doing something unholy and unpatriotic?
Yes, let that be clearly stated.
Our discussion of the Persian governments led us to this point. We observed that the Persians became worse and worse. And we argue that the reason for this is that they diminished the freedom of the people too much and introduced too much despotism, thus destroying friendship and a sense of community. And when these are gone, the governors no longer govern for the sake of their subjects or the people, but for their own benefit. And if they think they can gain even a small advantage for themselves, they destroy cities and bring fire and devastation to friendly nations. And just as they hate ruthlessly and horribly, they are also hated. And when they want the people to fight for them, they find no sense of community or willingness to risk their lives on their behalf. Their countless armies are useless to them in battle, and they believe that their salvation depends on hiring mercenaries and strangers, as if they need more men. And they cannot help but be foolish, since their actions proclaim that the ordinary distinctions of right and wrong in a state are insignificant compared to gold and silver.
Quite true.
And now, enough about the Persians and their current mismanagement of their government, which is due to excessive slavery and despotism among them.
Good.
Next, we must examine the government of Attica in a similar manner and show that complete freedom and the absence of all superior authority is not as good as government by others when properly limited. This was our ancient Athenian constitution at the time when the Persians attacked Greece, or more accurately, the entire continent of Europe. There were 4 classes, organized according to a property census, and reverence was our queen and mistress, which made us willing to live in obedience to the laws that were in place at that time. The vastness of the Persian army, both at sea and on land, caused a helpless terror that made us more and more obedient to our rulers and the laws. And for all these reasons, there was great harmony among us. About 10 years before the naval battle at Salamis, Datis came leading a Persian army by the command of Darius. This army was specifically directed against the Athenians and Eretrians, with orders to capture them and execute them under penalty of death. Datis and his armies quickly became masters of Eretria, and he sent a terrifying report to Athens that no Eretrian had escaped him. The soldiers of Datis had joined hands and captured the entire city of Eretria. Whether this report was true or not, it was terrifying to all the Greeks, especially the Athenians. They sent embassies in all directions, but no one was willing to come to their aid except for the Lacedaemonians. However, they arrived a day too late for the Battle of Marathon, possibly because they were occupied with the Messenian War or for some other reason that is not mentioned. After some time, news arrived of mighty preparations being made and countless threats from the king. As time went on, a rumor reached us that Darius had died and that his young and hot-headed son had taken the throne and was persisting in his plans. The Athenians believed that the entire expedition was directed against them because of the Battle of Marathon. They heard about the bridge over the Hellespont, the Canal of Athos, and the vast number of ships. They realized that there was no salvation for them either by land or by sea, as there was no one to help them. They remembered that in the previous expedition when the Persians destroyed Eretria, no one came to their aid or risked forming an alliance with them. They believed that this would happen again, at least on land. When they looked to the sea, they saw no hope of salvation, as they were attacked by over 1,000 ships. There was one slim and desperate chance of safety remaining, and that was to rely on themselves and the gods. All these circumstances fostered a spirit of friendship among them. They were afraid of the moment, but they also had a higher fear that they had acquired through obedience to their ancient laws, which I have referred to as reverence several times in this discourse. A good person should willingly serve this reverence, while a coward is independent and fearless. If they had not been driven by fear, they would never have encountered the enemy or defended their temples, tombs, country, and everything they held dear as they did. Instead, they would have gradually scattered and dispersed.
Athenian, your words are true and reflect well upon yourself and your country.
They are indeed true, Megillus. And it is appropriate to discuss the events of that day with you, who possess the virtues of your ancestors. I would like both you and Cleinias to consider whether my words also have implications for legislation. I am not speaking solely for the sake of conversation, but for the sake of argument. Please note that our experiences, as well as those of the Persians, were, in a sense, similar. Just as they led their people into complete servitude, we led ours into complete freedom. Now, how shall we proceed? I would like you to understand that our previous arguments have much to say for themselves.
That is true, but I would appreciate a more detailed explanation.
I will provide one. Under the ancient laws, my friends, the people were not the masters as they are now, but rather willing servants of the laws.
Which laws are you referring to?
First, let us discuss the laws regarding music, specifically the music that existed at that time. This will help us understand how excessive freedom gradually emerged. Music was divided into various types and styles. One type consisted of hymns, which were prayers to the gods. There was another type called lamentations, and another called paeans. There was also a type called dithyrambs, which celebrated the birth of Dionysus. They used the term laws, or nomoi, for another type of song, which they called citharetic. All these types were properly distinguished, and performers were not allowed to mix one style with another. The authority that determined, judged, and punished disobedience was not expressed through hissing or the raucous shouts of the crowd, as it is today, nor through applause and clapping. The directors of public instruction insisted that the spectators listen in silence until the end. Boys, their tutors, and the public were kept quiet with a hint from a stick. This was the order that the people willingly observed. They would never have dared to pass judgment through noisy cries. However, as time went on, the poets themselves introduced vulgar and lawless innovations. They were talented individuals, but they had no understanding of what is just and lawful in music. They behaved like bacchanals, indulging in excessive pleasures. They mixed lamentations with hymns, and paeans with dithyrambs. They imitated the sounds of the flute on the lyre, creating a general confusion. Ignorantly, they claimed that music had no objective truth and that its quality could only be judged by the pleasure it brought to the listener. By composing such licentious works and adding licentious words to them, they inspired the people with lawlessness and audacity. The people began to believe that they could judge for themselves what was good or bad in melody and song. In this way, the theaters, which were once silent, became vocal, as if they understood what was good or bad in music and poetry. Instead of an aristocracy, an evil form of theatrocracy emerged. If only educated individuals had been the ones judging, no great harm would have been done. However, in music, the universal conceit of omniscience and lawlessness first arose. Freedom followed, and men, thinking they knew what they did not know, lost all fear. The absence of fear leads to shamelessness. And what is this shamelessness, which is such an evil thing, but the insolent refusal to consider the opinion of the better due to an audacious kind of liberty?
That is absolutely true.
As a result of this freedom, disobedience to rulers follows, as does the attempt to escape the control and guidance of fathers, mothers, and elders. Eventually, even the control of laws is disregarded. At the very end, oaths and pledges are held in contempt, and there is no regard for the gods. In this, they imitate the old titans who rebelled against God and lived a life of endless evils. But why have I said all this? I ask because the argument needs to be reined in from time to time and not allowed to run wild. It should be held with restraint, so that we do not, as the proverb says, fall off our donkey. Let us once again ask ourselves, what is the purpose of all this?
Very well.
This has been said for the sake of.
For the sake of what?
We argued that the lawgiver should have three goals in mind. First, that the city for which he legislates should be free. Second, that it should be united within itself. And third, that it should possess understanding. These were our principles, correct?
Certainly.
With these goals in mind, we examined two forms of government, one being the most despotic and the other the most free. Now we are considering which form is the right one. We found that both forms, when taken to the extreme of either slavery or license, do not benefit either party. Instead, they only achieve perfection when they are balanced in the middle ground.
That's absolutely true.
And that is why we were discussing the settlement of the Dorian army, the city built by Dardanus at the base of the mountains, the relocation of cities to the seashore, and the mention of the first men who survived the flood. All that was previously mentioned about music and drinking was said to understand how a state can be best governed and how an individual can best order their own life. Now, Megillus and Cleinias, how can we test the validity of our words?
I think I know how we can prove their value. This discussion of ours seems to have been incredibly fortunate and exactly what I needed at this moment. It is as if you and my friend Megillus have come into my life at the perfect time. Let me tell you what has happened to me, and I see it as a kind of sign. Most of Crete is planning to send out a colony, and they have entrusted the management of this affair to the people of Knossos. The Gnosian government has appointed me and 9 others to handle this task. They want us to create any laws we see fit, whether they are based on the Cretan model or from elsewhere, if they are better. So, I ask you for a favor, which will also benefit you. Let us select from what has been said and imagine a state of which we will consider ourselves the original founders. This way, we can continue our inquiry, and I can use the framework you are constructing for the city that is being planned.
That's great news, Cleinias. If Megillus has no objections, you can be sure that I will do everything I can to please you.
Thank you.
And I will do the same.
Excellent. Now, let us begin to create the state.